Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 8th in the IWFM Navigating Turbulent Times series. Today's webinar has been coordinated by the IWFM Catering and Hospitality Special Interest Group, and as one of the committee members, I'm delighted to be facilitating this session. My name is Zoe Watts. I'm Commercial Director at Vacheron. We're a contract caterer specialising in the London corporate market. So first, may I introduce our panel of who over the course of the next hour will share their experience and expertise of operating catering services throughout the pandemic, and will answer your questions as you prepare to reinstate services in your own workplaces as the lockdown loosens. Firstly, Sam Tate is Operations Director from Baxter Story, who oversees the staff dining operations at Amazon's fulfillment centres, all of which have remained open whilst the majority of workplaces have been in lockdown. Andy Jones, we hope, will be joining us. He is having some technical difficulties, but Andy is chair of the Public Sector 100 Group and Managing Director of AJ Associates. He describes his main love as for the NHS and the care of patients and staff, ensuring their health and well-being. For the past 3.5 years, Andy's consultancy business has advised the NHS on their facilities, including catering services, and I'm sure that we can all draw on best practice from the healthcare sector as we plan our remobilisations. Ros de Oliveira is UK Facilities Coordinator for ADP Limited and is responsible for 5 sites, 2 of which provide staff dining facilities for 650 staff. Introducing Emma Hill, who has the impressive title of Group Head of Food, Health, Safety and Environment for CH&Co. The new normal inevitably comes with a whole new set of health and safety parameters and legislation. So Emma will offer her insight into what our responsibilities entail. And last but not least, Julian Friss, MD and Principal Consultant at Nella Davis. And Julian is also the Deputy Chair of the IWFM Catering Centre. Julian advises clients across all sectors, including business and industry and healthcare, and will share his thoughts on the economics of this whole new way of working. But Sam, if we can start with you, there's a plethora of information and reassurances being shared, and rightly so, from the catering companies on what measures they will have in place when reopening their facilities. If you could share with us your experience at Amazon and the challenges you've faced and how you've tackled these, please.
Thanks, Zoe. Of course. So we've stayed open, as you said, throughout the pandemic across 21 sites across the UK and Amazon. They were designated by the government as key workers relatively early on in the pandemic, and the food provision for all of the 21,000 associates across that estate was incredibly important. Our UK client team was absolutely focused on ensuring that provision remained, because the majority of sites are out in the middle of nowhere. They're not, there's no other alternative. And the main focus for us really was in line with Amazon, which is a very customer-centric organisation, ensuring that our customer service was maintained, even though actually the key sort of proposition that we were putting forward was actually a service where we were removing customer touch points, and really instilling consumer confidence throughout that as well, to ensure that people continue to use the facilities. We very early on took the decision to move to a model where we put self-service in. So we effectively put technology at the forefront of our offer. And what that meant was that we had a suite of tills across the estate, and we put in self-service across all of that. And we created an offer that was fully takeaway from the get-go. So it was fully compliant with the legislation that was introduced back in March, and ensured that at every point we were removing any possible contact or any possible sort of 2-metre social distancing barriers, if you like, so that we could make sure that we were compliant with social distancing. Amazon were in regular contact throughout, I think, with the government in terms of what they were and weren't allowed to do. So it was very important to them that we absolutely nailed the social distancing piece, but also that we could continue to service large volumes. So Amazon is all about breaks with large amounts of staff that come through. Obviously, they're very, very busy, and they've continued to be incredibly busy throughout the entire period. Our volumes have pretty much stayed the same across all of that. as ever, Amazon work incredibly fast. So for them, it was all about, we need this tomorrow. It's a bit like Prime. They work the same sort of way. If they ask you to do something, they expect it to turn up tomorrow. So they were, we had 3 days to put self-service in across the entire estate, which we managed to turn around. And an offer really that shrunk, but became focused on a sort of meal deal. So you could effectively pick it up at the counter. We removed all self-service, so no salad bars, no self-help. All of that came out. Everything was potted, and you then took it to the till. We actually put a barcoding program in on products that weren't barcoded at the time. You scanned it, paid for it, and went away. And they worked really, really hard with us to around that consumer confidence piece. So they put social distancing in within the restaurant space. Obviously, they can't sit at their desks, they don't have desks, and there is nowhere else for them to go. So, there's under HSE guidelines of where practically possible, they were still able to use that space with a takeaway offer, but all of the tables, chairs were 2 meters apart. And they also put thermal imaging in at the start. So when you came into their buildings, they were thermal scans. So they would really focus on creating a safe space, if you like, within the buildings as people came in.
Okay, great, thank you. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, how have you ensured that despite having to create an environment where you've removed all those social touch points, you're still able to deliver high standards of customer service and engagement?
Feedback has been really key for us. Amazon are a very feedback-centric organization as well, so they encourage a huge amount of feedback. And we've been working on a program which we brought forward, and with many other things that happened within the pandemic, sort of ran up to speed very quickly, to capture associate feedback, to ensure that everybody that wanted to sort of put feedback on the offer could. We were able to attend socially distanced associate forums, so to make sure that all of the feedback that we were getting from Amazon associates was being pulled through to us. And we made sure that whilst Amazon were less focused, I think it's fair to say, on our KPI results, that we maintained our KPIs through all of that as well, particularly the KPIs on feedback on the offer, the speed of service, and the quality of the food, because our really key goal was to ensure that we could deliver that service on a continuous basis without affecting any of those touch points, even though we'd reduced the offer. So our perception of choice wasn't damaged, and our perception of quality wasn't damaged. We were able to maintain that, which meant that actually, as I said, our sort of volumes have stayed stable throughout. So even though we've had reduced people coming through because of various COVID, either self-isolation or people have actually had it, our volumes have remained pretty much consistent across the piece.
We've heard quite a few stories about changes to opening times in order to accommodate staggered chef shifts or front of house shifts, or indeed, the workplace just change to working patterns in general. Have you had to review opening hours?
Yeah, we have, and we run a 24/7, 363-day service as it is. But traditionally there's always a sort of relatively short break time, and that's done over sort of a compressed period. What we've been able to do is, again, working with the UK team, is expand our break times to allow fewer volume of associates to come through at any one period. There is luckily quite a bit of shoulder space on either side of those breaks normally, so we pushed our services outwards into that space to ensure that less people come through, social distancing can be maintained. There's very accurate markings that are put all the way through the server as well, so there's good signage. Amazon have put in a good level of PPE as well in terms of their sort of face masks, not terming it PPE, obviously in line with government guidelines, but if you want to have a face mask, they'll give you one as well. So there's all of that reassurance, I think, goes towards, as I said, creating that consumer confidence that means that people will continue to use the facilities rather than staying away, bringing in a packed lunch. Okay,
great, thank you. We're still hoping that Andy can rejoin us, but in the meantime, Emma, if we can come to you from a health and safety perspective. We've heard from Sam about the initiatives that are in place at Amazon to ensure physical distancing and the measures to mitigate transfer of the virus. But can you tell us, what is our legal obligation, and is there new legislation that we should be following?
Yeah, so through this, you do have the coronavirus regulations that came into force right at the beginning of March, and they've been adapted as we've gone through the process. And then alongside sitting all of that is also the government guidance that's come out for various sectors, depending on what's open at the moment and what's opening up in the next few months. A key part of all of that is being able to conduct an effective risk assessment. And that has to happen in any workplaces that are either currently open or considering opening up. And depending on the type of business that you are, so for us, we are a multi-site caterer. We have 1,000 sites across UK and Ireland. And from that aspect, you also have to look at what the local legislation is. So Ireland are doing things slightly differently, Scotland, Wales, England, there's slight variations into what's coming out at the moment, what's allowed to be open, what's not, different types of measures. So with the risk assessments that you're doing, especially for us, we have our own set of risk assessments, but then we also work with the clients on site as well to make sure that they're tying in with anything that they want to do from a measure and control perspective. With that process, we've actually moved away from the terminology of social distancing and are calling it physical distancing, because within a workplace, it's not really about the social distancing aspects, it's about physical distancing. So it's still the 2-meter rules, how you go through that. But the terminology has changed a bit from the social aspect, especially now that lockdown measures are now starting to be released a bit more, that sort of thing. Definitely within all of the risk assessments that we're doing, it's the physical distancing. We've also created all COVID specific documentation. So that would be safe operating procedures, that would be the fitness to work, return to work forms and guidelines, and also safe systems of work around PPE. Although we're not mandating face masks, you know, there is the terminology of the face covering piece that's come in through government guidance. So making sure that people are aware of what those differences actually are. And when you're working with your clients, making sure that control measures they have in place work for you as well. And if there's extra things you need to put into your risk assessments, then obviously make sure that you cover that. Through the whole process, you need to engage with all of the team members. So even those team members that are on furlough, making sure that they're aware of what the procedures are when they come back to work, what that will look like, the measures that you're putting in place to make sure that the team members are safe, as well as the customers, because it has to work on both sides, especially within kitchen environments. And that's very difficult to do, the physical distancing piece, but looking at, can you segregate different areas within that kitchen? Again, are you using that rota system of bringing people back to work or not, depending on the scenarios? And just having those conversations, trying to bring people at ease really, and making sure that everything's in place. And then alongside all of that is then the training that goes with that as well. So we've gone through online training, we've created our specific training procedures that go through that, take everybody through those policies and procedures, communication, company procedures, liaising with the client, making sure the documentation is there. There is a requirement or an expectation, I would probably say actually, from the government that if you have 50 employees or more, that you are expected to produce those risk assessments on websites. That's difficult in the type of organisation that we are, because we would have thousands of them, you know, and you just can't do that. So there is a kind of way that you can do that through a statement to show what you're doing, where those risk assessments are available, and then they're available on demand if people want to be able to see them, or you can show templates, that sort of thing, to show the documents and that you're using. It's not a legal requirement, but it is an expectation. Along with displaying the government signage as well. So within all of the guidance that's gone out, there is a government poster, which is the 5 steps poster, which you need to display in all of your workplaces, restaurant areas, that type of scenario, to show that you've done the risk assessments, you've got social distancing, physical distancing in place, that you've gone through the training. All of those steps are there and measured. And there is also to be aware the HSE contact line and number that's also on there. So any of your employees at any point can contact HSE if they have any concerns of any of the measures that you've put in place. And that's something that you really do need to be aware of. They had restricted it at the beginning to certain areas and certain issues. Now it's kind of open for all, and that is on all of those posters. So you need to make sure that all of those measures are in place as well.
Great. We've had a couple of questions come through on the environmental impact of the new normal, and Emma, I will come back to you to ask that, but I think that we do have Andy has managed to dial in. Andy, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Right, I'm sorry about this. It's the NHS IT gremlins today. So we're moving out of COVID, and now we've got IT issues. So apologies.
Oh, well, I'm glad you could join us. So welcome to the webinar. So Andy, we've heard from Sam about how he's been operating at Amazon throughout the pandemic. And I wonder if you can add to that and talk to us about your experiences of keeping retail catering operating within the healthcare sector.
Yes, certainly. Obviously, the pandemic, we went into what's called a level 4, so a very senior level of priority, which meant we had to make some changes instantly. But foremost than anything was to ensure we kept the staff and visitors safe. We had to change all our standard operating procedures, had to be rewritten. Some of the key areas that we did find was our service went from a sort of a 9 till 8, a 7 till 8 service to a 24/7 service. And that was something that hadn't occurred in the NHS for probably 15 years. A 24/7 service was actually taken away on 95% of trust for cost improvements. So we had to reinstate that. So we had to look at all our rosters, what sort of levels of service we were going to offer over that 24-hour period now, which in itself may sound easy, but re-rostering your staff when you were losing staff to COVID was very difficult and a difficult time, and also working within social distancing became a very, very much priority for us to protect our staff. So we took the stance of taking the step back, focusing on what we needed. So salad bars was the first area, and our deli bar was the first area that we removed. We then screened off all our counters to ensure the food was served to the staff. And again, that was to give confidence on both sides and protect the products as well. We then, obviously, the restaurants, as we all know, are not designed for social distancing. We took the stance that if we took tables out, we could actually create a problem for ourselves. So we actually kept the tables in situ, but we actually removed seating at the trust timing because we'd got the space to do that. And that was, so we actually created ourselves natural social distancing by doing this. We actually encouraged people to eat within their allocated restrooms as well. So we created a delivery service to wards, so they could call order down, and within 1 hour we would deliver it to their point of area where their ward or department. Again, that was to limit the amount of movement around the hospital at that point in time. And I suggest people look at that going forward as an option, because we all know the high street is going to be a very different. We want our employees to feel safe and secure and remain in the workplace. We actually then looked at touch points. So our coffee machines where people were self-service, we actually put a process in for our standard operating procedures where we clean the machines every 15 minutes to reduce the levels. We'd already got hand gels because we're a hospital. We'd already got hand gel stations situated at the entrances and exit points, but we actually put extra ones at the service points so the visitors and the staff and our own staff could actually use those as well as an extra barrier. We actually went and put a wash hand station, temporary wash hand stations in at the entrance so people could actually wash their hands coming into the restaurant areas. That worked very well, and again, give a level of confidence. But for us, the learning was around the PPE, because obviously staff were using technical term for the NHS. They were not wearing their normal clothes. They were changing into scrubs. And again, that was a change of standard operating procedure, because scrubs normally would not be allowed into the restaurant area. So we allowed them into the restaurant area based on certain criteria. Face masks had to be removed. And now we're going into what's phase 3, the step down and bringing services back on board. The challenge of us there is Do we go back to a cash, accepting cash, or remain at a cashless system? How do we police that through? We did see a drop in sales. We saw a drop of 60% in sales, but that's actually now started to come back. We're down to probably a drop in just 20% of sales. So as you move forward, you do start to see your clientele start coming back into your restaurants. So for us, it was a challenging time. The staff have been fantastic, and we've really worked through it together as a team.
Great, thank you. Roz, it would be great if you could share your experience from a client's perspective. Having closed your catering services temporarily, how does the reopening of your services fit into the broader workplace strategy at ADP?
Well, Zoe, our service was fairly new anyway, and much loved by the associates because they'd been waiting a long time for catering in the buildings. We'd already moved into removing the self-service before we went into lockdown and installing sanitizers, etc. But for us at this stage, the most important thing has been for me to keep that dialogue going with the catering company that we use. We have a really good relationship anyway, but in this time, it is even more important that we keep regular calls and we keep talking about what we can do and where we are at in the whole process. We started the conversations very early around furloughing and what help we could give to the company. And we've moved into bi-weekly catch-ups now to talk about what sort of processes we can put in place and what would work within each of the individual sites. Luckily, they're both single occupancy, so we don't have to worry about other tenants in the building, so that makes it a little bit easier. So on the physical side, we've been looking at, first of all, when we let people back into the canteen, do they sit or do they take away? And very early on, we decided that would be an absolute, that we could not allow people in the service to sit in the canteen. They're very small, they're quite narrow, there would not be the chance to distance properly within there. And also the cleaning behind that would exacerbate the whole situation. We've looked at if we do have to enter the canteen to pick up food, then it will be on a queuing basis. And we've used the furniture a bit, as Andy has said, to create a pathway for people to walk in one direction around the canteen. So we've literally pulled all the furniture into the centre to create a perimeter walkway. But we've also looked at the point of whether we go down the ordering route to stop the movement as much around the building. And at the moment, our caterers are looking into a possible app that they've used in other sites that have stayed open, the same as Sam throughout the whole pandemic, and how that would work within the building. And whether we could actually set up delivery points so that the catering team or someone from the facilities team then delivers the meals to a certain area at a certain time. We've looked at the opening times as well, because previously we offered breakfast and then a lunch session. We feel that probably even at the very towards the end, we won't have enough staff in that will make it viable for both sessions. So we're looking very much at whether we extend the lunchtime session so that we can then allocate time slots for teams within the building. Our biggest building has 500 associates in it at a normal time. So it is important that we look at how we space even a small amount of those people out so that they can get lunch within a decent time frame. We've also looked at the use of crockery and cutlery and probably going back to, as both Sam and Andy have talked about, not using necessarily people's own cups, which we had a bonus scheme, a discount scheme for them to work with. That will have to be suspended for the moment, and we look at either disposables or some other form of minimising touch and spread of possible virus. From the food point of view, again, we're looking at what would be the best option for both parties. We offer at the moment a very good street food style menu for lunch. And while that would work, I think it's about looking at the menu and making sure that it's something that sits within the possibilities for the catering company to do without it causing them too much issues, too many deliveries, too much crossovers, etc. So probably looking at very much a Pret style hot and cold offer, but everything wrapped and ready to go away. We've looked at the physical safety of the catering staff as well, because they work in a very, very confined environment, and making sure that when we bring them back that it works for them. But I think probably the most difficult conversation that we've had has been as to when we would do this. From the point of view of ADP, it has to be financially viable for us, but also financially viable for the catering company, bearing in mind we will probably come back with maybe 10 to 20% of our workforce in the first instance, and rolling that out slowly. So we're working at the moment to decide when that tipping point is, that it actually makes it viable for both ADP and the caterers to provide that service once again. And we've had to be really realistic about that it may not be at the beginning. It may take a little while before we get to that stage. And then we can start working on how we go forward with pre-cleaning, cleaning out all the equipment, all of the extraction, and making sure that it's a safe environment for everybody to start with.
Great, thank you, Ros. Julian, we've heard from the panel about the impact of the physical environment, changes to staffing structures, changes to and the menu offering. Ros has just said that this all needs to be commercially viable. So can you talk to us about what is the commercial impact of this evolving normal, and what level of ROI can it expect?
Well, clearly tinkering with the old model is not an option, so we have to adapt and do this quickly. I think the panel have told us that. Workplace catering margins are already tight and the customers are very price sensitive. So we're all going to have to work together to get this right, to get this evolving normal. So in many cases, clients are faced with uncertainty on which of their staff need to attend the office at any one time. Maybe in manufacturing or healthcare, they're typically going to be a higher occupancy rate, but getting them quickly through the lunch period will still be a challenge. This is solvable, albeit the solutions might come from unlikely sources and reappraisal of both the employers and employees' values. So I'm going to talk about what we need to do next once we have got restarted, following on from the practical suggestions made by the panel. We see a shift of emphasis by clients to employee value propositions and actively encouraging greater digitisation from the caterers as a fundamental starting point. So right now, a client has to really think about how they want to look after their staff's catering needs. Removing food service altogether will be disastrous, in our opinion, especially where the high street only remains partially open, and with much of the same challenges that you have in the workplace, and equally the increased risk on staff going out. So this could be compounded by staff bringing their own food in, And then the infection control risk of shared fridges and kitchenettes, let alone food safety and pest control problems if proper controls aren't in place. And ultimately it'll lead to staff discontentment if badly handled. So food is essential to life, but also to socialisation, productivity, motivation, well-being, connectivity. The list is endless. The real ROI is around staff. Without them, you haven't got a business. We see a real focus on subsidy, and it's where an employer says, I'm happy to pay more because I'll have a more content workforce and I'll be rewarded downstream, and that's an extremely important point. It's going to be harder for those who've got a nil subsidy arrangement than somebody who's got cost plus. But we have to consider that if more than half the workforce are working from home, how are we going to keep them in the loop as well? So this brings me to my first point, really, about an employer value proposition, which you may be aware of. And this is around the EVP represents the values and the culture the employer embodies and the practical benefits for employees, such as learning, growth, development opportunities and benefits. People are 5 times more likely to be highly engaged if their organisation has an effective EVP. And clearly at this particular time, people are anxious and so forth, and there's a duty on the employer to look after their employees to make it a safe place and somewhere where they want to come back to. So most organisations don't have a long-term plan for an employment strategy that defines what as an employer they expect from employees and what is provided in return. And the CIPD points out that an effective EVP aligns the whole work experience from culture, mission and values to total rewards and benefits through jobs and people. And clearly catering sits within the rewards and benefits perspective. And we have to look at it from the point of view of the staff that you employ, the talent, the skill shortages, all the kind of stuff that's going on out there, and the cost of those guys moving on because they don't feel safe or they don't like the work in the organisation, or the guy down the road has got ahead of the game and he's got a much better offer and a better environment to work in. So it's about getting it right. It's about convincing really good candidates they want to work with you, and to do this, organisations need to understand that what they offer drives talent outcomes. So closing workplace catering is not, as I would say, a good look for employers or FMs alike. As I've said, employers need to invest more in it. Equally, service providers need to get with the plan and go beyond the installation of perspex screens, gel dispensers and contactless payment points. They are important. We've got to move on from that particular perspective now, because a lot of you have already done it. Technology and digitisation also play an important role in improving the employee experience, and thanks to COVID, I won't thank COVID, but it has forced people to accelerate technology and innovation that they had planned for years to weeks. There are lessons from a number of market influencers, and I looked at an article by the CIO of McDonald's, who clearly states that his company views data, the information around staff movement, what they do, as a strategic asset, which is an extremely important part of this. The digitisation of business, modernising, personalising and constantly evolving the technology is critical for their business. They have revolutionised their stores, and whilst people might be disdainful of their product, there are lessons to be learned here. So the caterer, which adopts this type of approach, is more likely to be successful in operating in the new or evolving normal environment. Clearly, client, caterer and customer need to be aligned and be flexible to change. Each needs to collaborate on getting the service we want at work. And in that, collaboration means not you're looking at your caterer to have an effective supply chain so they can act on trends quickly without constantly referring to contracts and all the stuff that gets in the way. This is really critical for an agile service provision, especially in getting the right menus, reducing wastage and getting an efficient service. So, for example, McDonald's and others are doing this. They've acquired various app developers to ensure that they can achieve this without off-the-shelf solutions, so they can develop it in real time. So caterers and FMs alike need to carefully consider this you're already using, well, we talked about Amazon, there's Starbucks, coffee app, Deliveroo. I noticed that Compass have just bought an app called Feeder, which is like a workplace Uber Eats, where there's a lot more that people can just call up from their smartphone. But to sum up, the employer needs to work with their FM and catering providers to invest in the catering and hospitality services that are reinvented in a format that works for everyone. A collaborative approach based on reciprocity, autonomy, honesty, loyalty, equity and integrity will be required. We also need to think that the real focus on data, tech, personalisation is essential, and to provide something that was not there before. The ROI will be immense, but it'll be a long view where everyone has to play their part. But it needs investment now, and this is the time to do it.
Great, thanks, Julian. So we have had a question asking whether permitting catering facilities is advisable when we return to work. Listening to what you have to say, I would suggest that from you, Julian, that is a resounding yes, based on delivering employee value proposition.
That's absolutely right. I think if we're going to get over this particular stage, and elements of this is going to stay forever. We can't get away from the fact that if we've resolved COVID, there might be another one coming along down the track, and we need to be ready for it. I think the point I made around suddenly people pulling out the bag, solutions they've been sitting around thinking about and implementing them well, and getting people into the workplace as an encouragement to get them into the workplace and eating properly, all that kind of stuff. As Andy said, 20 years since they had 24/7 dining, and I know for a fact that staff have been have missed it and they want it back. And it needs a crisis like this to make people realise that it's not just about margins and costs and so forth. It's about the people. It's about food. It's about nutrition. It's about motivation. Everything else that you look in food. And let's face it, lots of people listening in have different levels of subsidy, if at all. But typically in a workplace, £250, £300 per head per year, is that a lot to pay against having to compensate people leaving the employment or the other kind of stuff? So bring it back, open it up, make it happen. That's what my message is.
Right, and I think it is interesting. It will be very interesting to see what measures we're putting in place now do stay with us. Sam, having turned around the solution in 3 days, you said that some of the practices now, the employees at Amazon love it, and there will definitely be some of these new initiatives that won't be going away when when we sort of get to the end of this, the changes due to the pandemic. Sam, I think you're on mute.
And I was doing so well. Yeah, I think that's correct. I think having done a lot of feedback from the associates themselves and from our UK client team, it's likely to be something that actually stays. In reality, our service has become more efficient because of this and not less efficient. So the service itself, both from a customer satisfaction point of view, the real satisfaction measure a lot of the time on our associates is, can they get through the service on their break to sit down with their food whilst it's hot and eat it and then get back to work? Well, this service absolutely puts that at the front foot of it. And from a subsidy perspective, that's probably going to be a more efficient subsidy model moving forward as well. So plus the fact we've got more depth, it's actually less reliant on people, and at a time when staff are having to self-isolate, where we are having to have some challenges with with staffing, and it's given us a bit more resilience. So across the board on that, actually, it's probably something that both us and Amazon are looking to retain.
Okay, great. Emma, both Sam and Roz talked about the changes to the offer and how they are both moving much towards a more grab and go and an offer that does need a lot more packaging. We have had a couple of questions on this. Firstly, we've been asked, should individually wrapped items be ordered rather than platters? But a question on the sort of bigger picture really of packaging and the reliance on disposables. as all caterers and their clients' organisations were making such inroads in reducing the environmental impact of catering. How can we mitigate this impact as we rely on a packaging-heavy solution for this foreseeable future?
I mean, to be fair, I don't think that's changed in what was taking place before to what is happening now and will happen in the future. Sustainability is always going to be a big question with all of this. There's already been, you know, claims of, well, plastic's coming back and this is happening and this is going to be bad and everything else that goes with that. But to be fair, if you had the waste streams in place before for recyclable products, for compostable products, biodegradable, all of that, that can continue. And just because you might be buying more of that doesn't mean that if you've got the right waste stream in place that you can't control that. And absolutely that should still happen. So it does come down to those conversations again of, have you got the right waste streams? Have you got the right products in? You can get really good recyclable products now as well. But if you're going to put them into landfill, then before or after this, it was going to be irrelevant anyway. So I think this is a great opportunity actually for clients to be looking at those waste streams and making them more effective. So that if these questions do come up, you can categorically say, no, we are buying in a recyclable product. It is going into the correct waste stream. We've got compostable, it's going into the correct waste streams. And I think that shouldn't change anything that's happened prior or now.
Okay, great, thank you. We've had a question. Emma, you talked about risk assessments and obviously the 5-step COVID plan. We have had a question, are there any systems and assurances we need to get from our suppliers in order to advise staff on what is in place when the service is needed? Is there anything else that we need to be, or the suppliers and caterers need to be providing as reassurance?
I think it is having those open conversations of what is it that the client wants in place, what is it that the caterer can put in place as well. It is key around the risk assessments. The risk assessments will capture a lot of those control measures, be it the physical distancing, be it the training, be it the PPE that might be needed, the menu changing, all of that should be encompassed within those risk assessments. And if your caterer is good, they will have all of that in place, and they should be quite detailed. They should be under constant review. They should be communicated with all of those employees. They should also know from their perspective the suppliers that they're using, the measures that they're putting in place. I know HSE have been sort of promoting in the last 24 hours or so that from suppliers that are delivering to site to make sure that they have welfare facilities that they have access to as well. That has been all the way through, but because more sites are now opening and businesses are now opening, they are making sure that, you know, if you've got a delivery driver coming to site, they have access to toilet facilities, to hand sanitizer, to everything else that comes into that. So whoever your providers are, they need to be working with their supply chain as well to make sure that they're covering everything that they need to do. Things you do need to be aware of though is things like the Perspex screening piece, the PPE piece. There is going to be a shortage as time goes on, as more and more businesses open, because everybody's wanting the same thing. So pre-planning also comes into place for any suppliers that you're using to make sure that they can provide the service that you need. And if they can't do it quite in the way that they wanted to be able to do it, what are those extra precautions that they can put in place to maintain that service delivery all the way through?
Okay, great. Staff are going to be returning to a very different way of working, new practices, new procedures, new product offering. Can we talk about training? We have had a few questions on training. Andy, perhaps we can come to you to ask about the training that was needed as you know, you changed the ways of working in the healthcare sector. And I think perhaps we have lost Andy again. So if I can address that training question to Emma and Sam, perhaps you can talk to us about the training that you provided to staff.
Yeah, sure. I suppose if I do the sort of what we have been doing, and then maybe Emma could do the kind of, you know, what it looks like in the future. So from our perspective, obviously a big push was to get a lot of it online to enable people to complete that as quickly as possible. Really, it was you know, comprehensive training around the risk assessments as they came in, and we had to create new ones, obviously, as Emma has alluded to, in terms of sort of COVID-19 risk assessments. We actually started with a basic hand washing training that went out right at the start of the pandemic, because obviously that was a key focus from Public Health England to make sure that people were washing their hands in the right sort of way. It sounds incredibly simple, but even just making sure that everyone was doing that in the right way was key for us. And then really making sure that as we reopen locations, and not just Amazon, but as we reopen some of our other locations, that training is being cascaded back into locations that have stayed open throughout the entire pandemic. So clearly there's a lot of new focus being put on reopening sites, but actually for those of us that have remained open, it's important to ensure that we are in step with everything else that is happening as that continues.
Great, thank you. Emma, is there anything to add?
Yeah, I think from the future perspective, a lot of the training is going to go online. You need to have that traceability from an audit perspective, and that to show that training's taken place. We have also, going forward, and will maintain that going forward, we'll still do those reminders about the COVID symptoms, what it is, where it's come from, because as time goes on, people will forget, people will get a bit more comfortable in their workplaces and what they're doing, and they still need that little bit of reminder of the reasons why the physical distancing is in place, why those workplaces have changed from what they used to be. Also covering off PPE is a big thing. Although you may not be mandating face masks, people will want to use them. They will want to have face coverings. And if that's the case, you need to make sure that team members are aware of how to put them on, how to take it off, so the donning and doffing of that in a safe way, how to dispose of that if they are disposable ones, if they're washing ones, how to wash those and look after it correctly. And I think also when it comes to offices, you need to make sure that the disinfection processes have taken place. You have a clear desk policy. You look at whether you're doing hot desking or you're not. There is quite a lot of advice out there not to do hot desking. And to be fair, if you're putting in the physical distancing within the offices, we've done it within ours, it's very difficult anyway to have hot desks, because you are probably halving the capacity of what your offices would actually take. And along with the lines of what people have already said today, we haven't actually removed the chairs. We've taped them to the tables to stop people to moving them and actually being able to physically sit in them, which actually creates the barriers without you having to put up perspex screening and things like that. So it's kind of thinking bigger outside the box, but making sure that then is trained into all of your team members, it's communicated well, and they understand what those new processes will be and potentially how long they're going to be there for. There's a lot of talk of, people are saying, yeah, it'll change in a few weeks' time. I strongly believe, looking at it purely just from the health and safety aspects, there's going to be a lot of changes that will be in for the next 18 months, 2 years potentially, before people will start to feel more comfortable and before things will relax. And at this stage, we still don't know if that second wave is coming and what that will look like. And although as much as the government want to try and, community isolate people, that might not be possible depending on what that second wave is and how well the track and trace and everything else goes through the processes. So there's still a lot of unknowns out there, even though that businesses are opening, and you just have to be as safe as you possibly can. One thing I would say within any of your training that you're doing, just be careful about the wording of the COVID secure piece that's coming out from the government. It's a very tricky situation, and purely having a health and safety head on, you can't guarantee that any workplace is going to be COVID secure, because any of your team members could carry the virus. And especially when you're doing those risk assessments and that training piece, you need to kind of treat everybody as if they have the virus. And if you do that, then you will try and think of all of those controls that you can put in place. And you do need to remember that anybody can be an asymptomatic carrier, not have any symptoms, and can potentially still spread that virus. So although it might be sort of a negative way of thinking about it, you do have to think like that, unfortunately, in this stage, because there is, as I said, still too many unknowns out there that we don't know.
Great. Thank you very much, Emma. Julian, can we turn to you, please, for some closing remarks? What advice would you offer a facilities manager as they consider their options for reinstating their catering services?
Right, so to sum up, I see 3 stages. So the first one, and these are quite simple, short, medium and long term. So the short term is to get up and running and adapt as Sam, Ros and Andy have done, and the safety measures are in place as Emma suggests. Second, in the medium term, it's assisting the client in developing ways to engage with the staff, like an EVP or whatever else, invest in digitisation, re-engineering the model and adopting perhaps a much more collaborative approach. And this needs to be done quickly, because the high street will steal the opportunity, because they will catch up and overtake if we're not careful. And you don't want all your key staff leaving to join a competitor. That wouldn't be particularly helpful. I think in the long term, a lot of this will stick. I think Emma sort of ratified that really in her presentation. And this will be the new normal, and benefits will be realised for staff, catering, hospitality. And as some of the more extreme social distancing constraints are eased, we'll see things kind of getting back to a different normal. But what I'm going to say is that right now, look at your systems, your procedures, look a little bit further than just the screens. Look at how you can set up the service so at least you haven't got all the waiting times and all the other stuff. So those who act now will benefit, and I think people, companies are getting ahead of the curve to beat that challenge, and I think we will all see better catering services as a result.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Julian. Thank you to Emma, Andy, if he's on the phone again, to Sam and to Roz. I think we've heard some really great advice from all of you, some really good points to take away. I think just to sum up, it's looking at a review of all of the touch points within your catering facility, looking at coffee machines, considering self-service, grab and go. I think it's sort of a given really that cash will be gone, and also using technology wherever possible to keep the social distancing. We've heard quite a lot about furniture. Do we keep it, remove it, use it for the queuing system? I think there's lots of options there to consider. And from a health and safety perspective, obviously risk assessments are key, and I think some great advice from Emma there is to treat it as if everyone has the virus when you're looking at your risk assessments and putting those into place. From Roz, thank you for that. I think great advice to keep the dialogue going with your service provider. As we know, things are changing on a daily basis. Really helps with the planning, but I think as long as we keep that communication going, it's absolutely key. I think we're going to be facing some new terminology. Donning and doffing isn't something that we ever thought that we would be including in the training for our catering staff, but I think that's another expression that's come out of all of this. And I think, again, in terms of communicating the new normal to our clients, our customers, and looking at, you know, putting a positive light on this. What is the good that will come out of this, and what measures will we have in place going forward? Thank you again, and thank you to everyone who joined this webinar. Before we close, may I ask you all to please participate in the IWFM Impact and Experience Survey 2020. You'll find all of the information of that on the iwfm.org website. The website is also the home to the Insight Hub. It has a section dedicated to COVID-19, so there's a wealth of information there at your disposal. And finally, just to say that we are all in this together, so please do share your own experiences and best practice with us and you can send that to policy@iwfm.org.uk. So once again, thank you everyone. It's been a really useful session. We look forward to the next one.
Thank you.